Good morning. Morning, and good morning to everyone who is joining us online. We're so thrilled to have you guys here this morning. My name is Samantha Donaldson. I'm the Vice President of Communications here at the Partnership for Public Service. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Partnership, we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to making the federal government more effective. And we try to achieve that mission through a variety of different ways, including convening people from across government and convening key leaders like yourselves to tackle different issues that you're experiencing. As federal communicators, you play an important role within your organizations and across government, and we're thrilled to have you guys here with us this morning. And I've been thrilled to partner with the Federal Communicators Network over these past almost 5 years, I believe. So this is our last quarterly training of 2019. I want to say a special thank you to Christine Stevenson, Virginia Heyer, and the whole Federal Communicators Network leadership for their help in planning these trainings this year. They've been really robust and I think shared a lot of great practices that I hope you guys are implementing back within your organizations. And a big thank you to Nola Talsma from the Partnership for Public Service for all her great work on this event this morning. This morning's workshop is on brevity, clarity, and the power of plain language. We have an amazing lineup ahead for you this morning. We're going to have a workshop from Dave Lipscomb and Chip Crane from the Center for Plain Language. But before we dive into the workshop, we're going to first hear from Nick Johnston, who's the editor-in-chief of Axios. Axios launched in 2017 with the mission to get readers smarter, faster with news and information that matters. Their guiding principles include putting the reader first. One of my favorite is the next phrase, elegant efficiency, making reading, watching, and listening as clean and reader-friendly as possible, and providing smart content and, of course, smart brevity. Nick, who leads the entire Axios newsroom, is going to give us an overview of how they deliver smart content and smart brevity. After his remarks, he'll open it up to Q&A. And what I would ask you all to do is, as you have questions, if you could just wait till the mic is presented to you. This way, our friends joining on the live stream can hear the questions. And for those of you who are joining on the live stream, there's a great opportunity for you to ask questions as well. Just type your question in the chat box, and someone from the partnership will make sure to ask it of Nick. So please join me in welcoming Nick Johnston.
There's a cup holder. Thank you so much for that great introduction. It is great to be here. I love doing this kind of sort of telling the smart brevity gospel from Axios. It's much more fun than going to work. So let's see if I can figure out how to do this. I think I might have a cool video to sort of kick this.
One big thing you need to know. This is just the beginning.
The only thing that cuts through is information of value.
That was a little promotional. Sorry about that. Are folks here familiar with Axios, sort of generally, kind of? So what I'd love to do is kind of give you a sense of why we exist, sort of where I come from, why we created this, and what we've learned in launching it, and how that can be useful for folks like you. I've been a journalist my entire career. I started out at the Washington Post covering banking and finance. I was at Bloomberg for 15 years. I covered Congress. I covered The Hill. I covered the 2008 presidential campaign. I was a White House correspondent for 2 years, and I had this sense over my entire career that everything I was writing was boring and stupid, and nobody was really reading it. As a content creator, there is a moment in your life, this certainly happened for me when I was at Bloomberg, where you get access to the analytics, right? And it is an apocalypse. Right? You see that no one is clicking on anything you're writing. No one is reading any of the things that you're actually doing. And for me, it's sort of like it jarred me. It's sort of like, you're like, what am I doing wrong? And I had an opportunity at Bloomberg to join an internal startup called First Word, which was a new service within Bloomberg on the terminal, the financial service, to figure out sort of what readers wanted. right? And they went and started doing reader interviews. And it was the first time in my career as a journalist I ever actually thought about who was on the other side of the screen. And for me, that was just like a religious experience. Like it completely upended everything I had done in my entire life. Sort of like hearing like sort of what kind of information readers actually wanted, how they were consuming it, how they were living our lives. And I had an opportunity then to sort of build something like that for Bloomberg Government. If you're a Bloomberg Government subscriber, you may have used it on their service called First Word. Very short, punchy, analytical pieces on news and information, delivered sort of in a knowing way, sort of very efficiently. And the reader response we got was enormous on that. And it really made me sort of think about sort of like the entire information infrastructure that I've been doing in journalism was wrong. While I was at Bloomberg learning this lesson, Jim, Mike, and Roy, the founders of Politico, were still at Politico sort of learning the exact same lesson. Jim Vandehei, our CEO, my boss, great guy, has an analytical revelation of his own. He tells a story about one day he wrote this, I'm sure, brilliant column about Hillary Clinton or something, and the CMS made him break that column into 4 pieces on the web. And it was the first piece that got 1 million views. Then the second piece got 300,000 views. The third piece got 30,000 views. The fourth piece got 0. And it was a moment for Jim to realize that, wait a minute, the readers are telling me something here that I'm not listening to. And then the final sort of piece that we got anecdotally, which led to us formation of Axios, was realizing that this has been invented. Every single piece of information ever created by humankind is in this. Every movie, every song, every book. I can order food, I can arrange for dates, I can book travel. It's just all in here. And it's bombarding me with things. Like we've had access to infinite amounts of information. And so the problem we set out to solve was exactly this. We're deluging people with information that's not sort of reflective of the way they consume it. And they're being bombarded with all these other kinds of things. Since I came up here, let's see, I have 4 notifications already. Who knows what I'm missing and who will help me cut through that? And all of the mechanisms that we'd built, sort of all the training that I had as a journalist, was built for not this moment in time. Right? Like I love, and this is maybe apocryphal, but I love sort of the idea, if you think about sort of like how newspaper articles are. Why is an average length of a newspaper article 850 words or 1,000 words? Because in 1850, that's how big the paper was that they bought. So like, we're fundamentally doing this all completely incorrectly. And so we all quit our jobs. Like Mike, Jim, and Roy left Politico in January of 2016. I joined in that summer. And we began sort of a journey to figure out, okay, we knew these kinds of things anecdotally. What could we learn sort of from the data? And what we started to learn is just like, it was proving all these things that we already knew, right? That engagement time on content is very quick. It's very short. People will arrive on a page, try and get what they can get out of it and leave. Like they'll bounce very quickly. They'll share without reading. People just read headlines. All these things we know sort of to be true. Like how many times have we retweeted something on Twitter without ever reading the article? A funny story about that. When we launched, I remember the first day the president retweeted us, which was pretty cool. It was a story about a factory coming back to America. You know, remember those stories at the beginning of the administration. The second sentence of the story, however, was that the factory actually wasn't moving back. So the president himself is just sort of like, I'm just going to read one sentence. So like we know all these things to be true, and as we pulled out this kind of data, we learned more and more that people don't dig down into a lot of these types of stories. And they have incredibly high expectations sort of for their time. Like remember the creation of this means I have access to everything. It means I can move my thumb an inch and do whatever I want, right? And so how do you keep someone from moving their thumb an inch to go look at those kinds of things? And also what's really important is sort of understanding context, right? When I have access to an infinite amount of information, I want to know why this is important or why I'm reading this. Like I can talk to my phone and find out anything I want, but I can't figure out why that's necessarily important as easily. And so it really brought us like real true expertise in sort of communication became very important. And then as we unpack this kind of stuff, we realized that like most of the information delivery mechanisms for journalism, 100%, had not adapted to that. Right, the newsroom culture that I had come from, and Bloomberg is not a legacy news organization. Politico is not a legacy organization. They were still built with centuries of weight behind them on how they delivered information, how they thought about communicating with their readers. And so we spent a ton of time sort of thinking through these kinds of things and trying to figure out what would we do for an information system that is not just digital first, but also mobile first. And so what we came up with, I hope this animates. Yes, it does. Awesome. And so for those of you familiar with Axios, you know this sort of style. It's very different. It looks different. It's structured differently. And it's very, very deliberate in how we sort of thought through, and I want to unpack kind of sort of those ideas. And we call it, so smart brevity. We're very big on slogans and manifestos at Axios, and this is one of our first ones. Sort of a crisp conversational style that is sort of distilled down and sort of what really matters. So like I mentioned, why is a newspaper article 850 words long? Because that's how long the paper was. Why is an Axios story on its fundamental unit 150 words long? Because that's what I can fit on an iPhone screen, along with a visual. Why is our style very much broken up using bullets and bolded and things we call axioms, sort of delineating things? Because we literally looked at the science. Like we had an incredible meeting with a professor from the University of Maryland who does eye tracking studies to see how people consume information, particularly digitally. And when an eye encounters a giant block of text, an eye gets sad. Like it doesn't know what to do, right? Like how to navigate it. And like think about how you navigate, how you consume information on your phone, how you look for guideposts, ways to understand those kinds of things. And so we very much deliberately thought about how the format of the style looks. I am blown away when I look back on my journalism career, how I literally spent zero time thinking about the formatting of my article, right? I would just type. I would put paragraph lines in there, that was it. At Bloomberg, sometimes I would play with headlines, but there was zero understanding as a content creator about sort of how that would look. We would hand that off to other people to sort of think about it. But it was like, I wrote it, it's my information. Like I should really be invested in sort of how this looks and how the reader consumes it. So like the two parts of smart brevity, first is smart, right? What we have learned sort of when you're writing short, it's very difficult to fake. Like I love the old Mark Twain line, I'm sorry I didn't write you a short letter, I didn't have time. I wrote you a long one instead. Mastering this kind of writing style demands true expertise. Like I have been incredibly blessed in my life as an editor, being able to hire amazing journalists. I think I'm good at it because I was a pretty mediocre reporter, because I was a generalist. Like I knew a little bit about a lot of things, and so I wasn't delivering real value to anyone. And so we went out and like really focused on sort of like hiring true subject matter experts and how to build true subject matter experts, because that's the real way that you can write in our sort of style, this brevity style. Like literally getting to the point as quickly as possible, right? I love the easiest way to train young journalists is they'll write something and they'll send it to me, and I'll call them over and I'm like, this is interesting, like what were you trying to write? And they'll say something. That sentence is every single time better than what they type. Like when people sit down at keyboards, they become idiots, right? That's one of the most consistent things I've ever found. And so we've really tried to push for a conversational style and a way to sort of like grab people by the lapels, right? Like if you notice our newsletters, each one starts one big thing, colon. And I love that as a framing mechanism to force my writers to write something that's good enough to complete that sentence. Mike Allen, who writes Axios AM, sometimes wishes that sentence said, holy shit, colon, to really get people leaning into it. But like, remember, I can do anything I want on this. Why am I reading your stupid thing, right? Like give your writers the ability to frame it in that correct way and show the readers that's important. And then also revealing that you get maybe two sentences to grab someone's attention. Like Mike calls it our barstool test. Imagine you're sitting next to someone at a bar watching a football game or a baseball game. You want to tell them something. You probably get about two sentences for that person to pay attention. Use those two sentences. What I love doing as a test is in like picking up a newspaper and reading the first two sentences of whatever the lead story is. And then imagine sitting at a bar telling your friend those two sentences. Your friend would think you're insane, right? House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, RD-California comment today. Like, what's wrong with you? Like, have you, it's just like the way we write these things becomes so formal and convoluted. No wonder people sort of like skip to the next thing and bounce. And then one thing we did is something we call axioms, which are sort of like bolded guideposts that we give for the reader. This was another transformative moment for me. And so like the most common one we use is why it matters. And I remember when we started using that, I thought, this is stupid and cliched. Like I think we're using too much of a blunt instrument in our readers by telling them why it matters. And the reader feedback was off the charts. Like I was blown away by how grateful people were in writing like, thank you for in the second sentence telling me why I'm reading this. It's so clarifying. And then I think back to my journalism training, right? At Bloomberg, we would try and get that maybe in the fourth paragraph. But if we thought we were really good writers, like you'd literally make it a kicker. You'd put the reason for the story in the last sentence of the article. was like, why are you just being such a jerk to your reader about that? Like, they can go read anything. And so we created a bunch of these guideposts to sort of give a context very, very quickly as to why they were reading those kinds of things. And being that transparent and clear about it was like transformative for me. Like, Jim loves to talk about how he ran Politico for 10 years. And Politico was a great, tremendous media organization, a spectacular legacy for him. But no one ever like wrote him emails saying thanks for Politico. What we find now is, and I have a general inbox, news@axios.com comes to me. Random people just write to say thanks. Thank you for writing a story that's shorter than I have time to read. Thank you for telling me something in 3 sentences instead of in 7,000 words. Thank you for literally telling me in the second sentence why I'm reading this. Like, people are very hungry for this kind of information. So this is some of the feedback we've gotten about sort of just like emails that people just email us like anonymously into our anonymous inbox, sort of telling us why they love these kinds of things. And that's been sort of really kind of affirming for me. It's sort of like helped me figure out, like, okay, maybe we're onto something here, considering that, you know, in 3 years we built a stable of 20 newsletters. We're profitable. We have an HBO show. Like, we're maybe onto something conceptually in how this is working. And I also know another reason it's working is that people are stealing it, right? If you read the Washington, I'm not dump on other legacy news organizations. I love them, I subscribe to them. But, you know, they steal our ideas. Right? If you look at the Washington Post newsletters, they lift all of our things. The Wall Street Journal just did a newsletter overhaul, which essentially copied Mike Allen's newsletter. There are other startups like Morning Brew, like Market Snacks, that are lifting some of our ideas. And I feel like that makes me feel like that sort of we're onto something that is true. I'm going to do a little sideways here. Another key element to this is sort of thinking about this visually. This is another religious experience for me. If you're familiar with Axios, you're familiar with our sort of very compelling visuals. And one of the first meetings we had as a startup, we had a meeting where it was like, okay, what should the visual style be? And at Bloomberg, I thought my reporters spent too much time thinking of visuals. Like, I thought it was a waste of time. They should only think about words. And so I said, we should put a picture of the Capitol Dome on every single one of our stories and just forget about it. I, thank God, was overruled. And we went out and hired an actual visual team. And this has been incredibly important, to really think hard about having a visual style and hire experts to do it. Do not let your print people do visuals. They will do a bad job of it, right? Like, I do not know the correct way to shade something or draw something. I've hired internal people and I've empowered them to create amazing illustrations for artworks, to create amazing visual graphics. That I completely underestimated as such a compelling way to sort of engage with the reader, right? Let a chart tell something in 2 words what you would otherwise take thousands and thousands of words. I'm so thankful I was overruled on that. So what happened when we started this? Like, it kind of worked. Like I said, a joke I love to tell when I left Bloomberg to join Axios, I told Vanda High, this has to work at least for 18 months because I just had another kid. But we're still in business and that kid is 4 years old. So it worked really well. And we found out that we got a really engaged audience. Like, this is a slide we use for advertisers, so not so much for you folks. But it gives a sense of sort of like, okay, smart, successful people figured out that this was sort of valuable and engaging. And so they interacted with our content. And we've grown to, we're probably even bigger than this. Now, I think we're 20 newsletters. We're doing events. We're on HBO. We have a partnership with NBC. Sort of like this concept of content, I feel validated in a journalism marketplace, 100%. Like, I can hire journalists from any place in town. We compete at a high level with any other like journalists. Like, I feel like we've built a really interesting journalism brand. I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud of my reporters for achieving that. But then something else happened. We started getting emails from other people asking us how we take this out of news. Probably 3 or 4 months after we launched, and this is totally % true, I got an email from the American Soybean Association. And they said, I love Axios. Can you fix our newsletter called eBean? Literally, that's what it's called. And I said, no, that's not my job. You're crazy. But then, just for fun, I fixed eBean. Like, I turned it into Axios style. And I was like, holy cow, this is really interesting. There is an element here that I don't understand, that we started figuring out that sort of works for other kinds of sort of communicators. And so we started to sort of build that out. Like, we're trying, like, this is why I love kind of these conversations, is sort of like, can we take the lessons that we've learned here and build something to help communicators of all kinds sort of deliver information? So, like, if I think about it, like, my journalists are no different than any of you or any of the people who work on your teams. We all have pieces of information that we're trying to convey to a very smart, very busy audience that are being deluged with millions of things, that don't have any time, that would probably be rather watching Succession on their phone than reading what I'm pushing to them. And so how can I figure out ways to break through that? And so we've actually done a couple case studies with this. Sort of, we partnered with BP, and we run their internal newsletter. Now, we sort of train them in how to write it in Axios style. We've sort of given them coaching and tips and sort of given them some CMS help to think about it. And it took off the exact same way. And that's been incredibly sort of validating and encouraging to me to figure out that. So we're on a way to sort of really transmit information. We work with United Health as well, very similarly. And then the feedback, similar to sort of the emails that I would get from random readers, sort of like all of a sudden people at United Health are like, oh my God, I have a newsletter here that I'm actually reading. This is actually incredible. And that's been very validating in this kind of style. And that sort of gets to kind of very broadly, like the point, sort of the why it matters, is that we've thought long and hard over the last 3 years about how people consume information and sort of how they live their lives. Sort of like we built this both on anecdote, about decades of experience in journalism, and then looking at actual data, right? And then we've tried to build a style that cuts through that. And on journalism, I think it has. And what I think is most fascinating about this is that it may be a template for other communicators, sort of to help people understand how people are living their lives and how people are consuming information, and what are the tips and tricks that we've learned as journalists that I can sort of help impart to other folks to help them kind of cut through the noise. Like we talk about the mission-driven nature of Axios, where sort of it's not just like doing journalism, which is fun and awesome, but we're in this moment in time when people just don't know what to believe anymore. Like people don't know how to consume information. Sort of we're drowning in all this kind of stuff. Like this should be the greatest time ever to sort of be an information consumer because we have access to essentially anything ever we want. And it's miserable, right? It's horrible. Like we have no idea what's going on. And that's, I think, because the mechanisms we have for communicating haven't adapted to that. And I think what Axios tries to do a lot in our journalism is our newsletters and also now in video and I hope in audio, well, is try and figure out how to adapt that. And I love talking about it. I love sort of talking with other professionals in this kind of arena to sort of figure out sort of, okay, what are the things you were learning and how can I import that into the style of my newsroom? And so I'd love to stick around here for, I don't know, I got 30 minutes to kill before I have to go back to work. And so I'd love to tell me if I'm wrong, tell me if I'm right. I'm happy to chat, answer your question about anything, but thank you so much for having me today. Oh. I think you gotta wait for the mic. You can use my mic.
I've got my mic. Well, I can just. I think everyone can hear me. Sure. My question is really about the group here, and they aren't news writers, right? We aren't news writers, and a lot of the pages, a lot of the communication that we create lives on for a while. It has a shelf life that's pretty long. And so if, a hurricane is coming, we have a page, say ready.gov has a hurricane page. And it lives on for a while. And it's news that not only, as you put it here, you said what someone can, if I understand it, discover, read, and understand.
Yeah.
For a lot of folks here, it's much more about, I'm in a hurry. I need to find this information. I need to find out what I can, how I can work my passport. It's much more about find what they need,
right,
understand it, and then use it to actually get something done that the public needs to get done. So do you feel like some of what you're finding can really help with that?
I don't see why it wouldn't, right? Like it's the same thing. It's conveying a piece of information, whether it's like, okay, Trump did a tweet, a hurricane's coming to your house, like here's how you should evacuate. Like there's still, when I were to work through sort of the same steps, it'd still be sort of like I get 2 sentences to sort of explain something. And there's something I sort of glance over because you can probably tell from my metabolism, much more on the brevity side of everything. We do create mechanisms for like going deeper and explaining more. Like when we launched Axios, we had a button. So everything fits onto a screen, but you can expand it beyond that if you want. We used to call it a read more button, now we call it a go deeper button because like that was from feedback from readers, it's like sort of how they think about it. Like what people really want is the ability to sort of read more about those kinds of things. Like there is a universe of people who will want to read the white paper who will want to click on the transcript or read the bill language or the bill text. Like, so I think that's valuable. And remember, like, we invented the internet, so like that's all there, right? You can find it. People, if you can direct people for that, that's great. What's more difficult is sort of, okay, can you siphon out the 2 sentences of that matters? And then another part of that is something we've learned in the last 3 years is there are things that you can't explain in 150 words. Right? There are things that really do take a lot more effort and sort of diligent reporting and writing. And so what we do for that is we have things called deep dives, where we do a newsletter takeover of Mike's weekend newsletter, all on one topic. And those could be 2,500, 3,000 words long, but we stick to the same principles on sort of how people consume it. We still break it down into those kind of pieces and deliver in a way, so like remember, like they're on their phone, right? They've got 5 minutes to kill, if even that. How are they consuming it? Like, be aware of that. And so even when we do much more in-depth articles, we're still sticking to those fundamental principles. And I think it's just like thinking about that all the time, right? Like not losing sight of how people are consuming this information and how deluged they are with all these other kind of things, and sort of how can you cut through on that.
How has this, the research that you've done and the experience you've gained affected communications, just even outside the newsroom, outside of the website itself? I'm just curious how expansive it's gone for you.
As of last Thursday, I now write my weekly staff newsletter to the newsroom in an Axios newsletter template. I was like, if it's good enough for the newsroom, it's got to be good enough for me, too. And so part of what we've done, and also we have a company-wide newsletter that we send every Sunday from the CEO in that style to see what we can learn and kind of employing it ourselves in sort of non-news ways. I mean, I've only been doing that for a week, so I don't really know. But I feel like it seems like the feedback I get from my newsroom is like, okay, this is more engaging. Like I understand sort of like how to consume information like this because I work at Axios, so it makes perfect sense to get another way. I've found from like just personal experience, I can't read newspapers anymore. I've kind of been ruined by Axios. And then like I open up a paper and I see a wall of text and I'm just like, ugh, I don't have time for this. It's just like, what's going on in Belize? Just tell me. And so it's like I'm sort of rewiring myself. And these are, I feel like as our attention spans are being destroyed by the internet and Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and everything, sort of like we're going in that direction. I get asked a lot, right? Isn't it horrible that our attention spans are being ruined? And it's like, it doesn't make a difference, right? You can't fight it, right? Like no one's going to uninvent the internet or take away your Wi-Fi. So you might as well surf that wave.
Do you see in sort of the short information span a place for more narrative-based work? Narrative-based,
yes,
story-based.
If it's good. So I don't read newspapers, I read books, right? So like there's this middle area of content creation that is dying, not dying fast enough for me. And I'm not opposed to narrative. Like I subscribe to the New Yorker, right? It's really, really good. Like I read that 40,000 word story about the guy who walked across Antarctica. Like it was amazing. But what's key, and I'll say this as a recovering narrative journalist, is like we all sat down and are like, oh, I'm going to write 2,000 words on this cloture vote because like, oh my God, all this. Like, no, stop typing. No one cares about this. Where we need to understand like there are things that deserve awesome narrative. And if you are a good, awesome narrative writer, go and write that awesome narrative. And then what I tell in newsrooms is like, you know what, you're probably not that good, awesome narrative writer, so stop, right? Stop typing. Have the courage to take your hands off the keyboard of that. Because when readers have access to everything, like they're not gonna read something just because it's in front of them anymore, because they can move their thumb an inch and they can go find that awesome piece of narrative. And I think a lot of it is 100% in newsrooms, it is about being very disciplined. It's about saying, like, so when we're going to go long on a story, it's about being very disciplined, saying, okay, we've got the goods. So like this morning, we had a story by Jonathan Swan that was longish for us. It's probably 600 or 700 words long. That's because he'd uncovered a bunch of contracts about Chinese people secretly paying Steve Bannon to fuss around with sort of foreign policy things. Like, okay, we had the goods on that one. Swan, you get 600 words on that. But that comes from like being very honest. Like, so okay, when Swan is doing a story about a Trump tweet, you're done at 200 words. Right? And like being very honest and very rigorous about that because the readers will punish you for it.
I want to hear a little bit about how you gauge and edit the headlines themselves and make them more or less clickbaity, more or less sassy. Like, is there sort of a
don't make them
there?
clickbaity, because readers have figured that out, right? Like, they've outsmarted you. They'll fall for it once, and there's an incredible brand damage that comes now that a lot of news organizations that went through that clickbaity thing like will never escape. And we've been very good about, like, from day one, not sort of falling into that. And like the line Jim Vandehei tells is, people love doing headlines with question marks. Like, Axios doesn't ask questions, we answer them. So we'll never do a headline with a question mark. And we'll very much resist these darker impulses. Like these darker impulses to write, like, you won't believe what Donald Trump just tweeted. Because there will be a sugar high on that, and then readers will be like, I can't trust this person anymore. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do like fun, cool, engaging headlines. And if you have, like, the joke is like the quintessential Nick Johnston, Jim Vandehei Axios headline is siren, shock, and then you put a headline here, like, to really grab the reader by it. But you have to have the goods if you're going to do that, because readers are smarter about that now as well. And then the platforms, I know this is maybe not as effective for you, but sort of from a journalism standpoint, the platforms pay attention to that a lot too, and will punish brands if you're relying on platforms for traffic, if you play those kind of games.
Hi, good morning. We actually do run a daily journalistic article on our website, and we have a listserv that we send it out to. And we typically tell our authors to keep the story between 500 and 750 words. But from what I'm hearing, it sounds like maybe that's too long. So I wanted to hear a little bit more about the length of the content.
I mean, well, like, let the information dictate that, right? Like, if it's a story about a guy walking across Antarctica, all right, maybe that's 40,000 words. But if it's a story about, a one-off sort of, like, we're doing a thing, like, I think it's being very vigilant about that. So, like, people have a weird relationship with length. So, like, I'll talk about the journalism relationship with lengths. I'm old enough to remember when newspapers had a news hole. People know what that is? It's sort of like you had the print paper was out, you put the mattress ads in it, and you had space left over for articles. That was your news hole. And when I started out at the Washington Post, you were assigned articles. You're like, okay, what's the news hole? Okay, you had 8 inches to write this story. And I remember when we began the transition to the web, we were like, holy cow, we're free from the news hole. We can now write as long as we want. That was 100% backwards. The fact that we were freed from the news hole meant we could write as short as we want. I don't have to fill this space. And what the problem with content creators do on the internet is they view it as limitless. When it's not, it's limitless in the fact that you don't have to fill it, right? Like, the internet will adjust to that length. And it's very difficult for people to sort of think, like, look, I run Axios. Axios is a startup founded 3 years ago under the concept of smart brevity. I have to yell at my reporters all the time to write shorter. Right? Probably every other week in our weekly news meeting, I'm like, guys, stop, it's too long. But so to be really disciplined about that, and that's when the sort of the feedback mechanism comes from readers. They're sort of like, oh, thanks, right? Like, think of the data. You probably have analytics for sort of like how people come to the website, how long do they stay? How long do they stay on the website? They stay on the website 10 seconds, 15 seconds, for the most part. And so content creators view that as a challenge for the most part. Certainly in journalism, it's like, okay, they come for 15 seconds. How can I trick them to stay for a minute? What are the things I can build in to increase that engagement time? I look at that and I'm like, okay, as a separate challenge, what if I could get them done in 10 seconds? Give them 5 seconds of their life back. No one's gonna give them a greater gift than that today, to go stand outside and talk to their kids or watch Succession on their phone, right? Like, the reader screams at us about sort of like the amount of time they want to spend and how they want to live their lives. And we don't know, we just don't listen. Right? We spend our entire time just not listening to that.
Hi, good morning. My question is concerning with the 24-hour news cycle and news constantly breaking, et cetera, and of course everything being on the web now. I'm curious to know what the rhythm of your newsroom is as far as producing content, covering breaking news, and also updating stories, et cetera. What does that look like?
So the newsroom is almost 24 hours. Like, we have someone in New Zealand who covers the late night things. On the web, we are constantly updating stories and doing write-throughs and posting breaking news alerts and pushing it to people. I'm evolving, though, kind of away from that towards a more deliberate sense of consumption. So like there's something weird happening right now. We're in the golden age of newsletters. Why is that? That makes no sense. The email inbox is 40 years old, right? It looks the same as it looks like when I was in college, right? I just have a list of messages and I go through that. And so like, why are so many people sort of gravitating to newsletters? I think it's a cry for help, right? We're looking at the inbox as a life preserver to help us navigate that sort of relentless news cycle. And so why I love newsletters as a product is it's sort of like a reader declares an intent to have a relationship with Axios. And I say, I'm going to email you once a day, maybe twice a day, maybe only once a week for certain topics. And so you can take a step back from that relentless pace and just get it at a certain moment. Now, if you want sort of to drown in sort of the flood of information, that's great. But sort of the inbox is a way where you can sort of control your information consumption, right? We've actually begun to evolve thinking also about the concept of the infinite scroll, right? So Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, you sort of scroll forever. And Axios, still today, you can sort of scroll forever. But as we think about our website redesign, we want to get rid of that because that doesn't help the reader at all. Like we don't want to create this false sense of engagement scrolling forever. We want to give you a sense of completion. And that's what a newsletter does as well. It's sort of like Mike's top 10. Like Mike, you get to write 10 things every day. He cheats and puts in bonus things often, but at least it ends at some point. And so there's a moment when you're finished, right? You know, and you can put your phone away and do something else with your life. And I think that's how I think a lot about kind of that breaking news thing. Like there's always a benefit to sort of like scoops and breaking news and sort of push alerts and stuff. But people need a way to consume this with sort of intent in a time-limited way. And I think that's why we're in this golden age of newsletters, because people are drowning.
So I actually have a question from an online viewer. Sorry, over here.
Oh, sure.
So they're wondering, how do you weigh the risks of being too brief? Sometimes people don't understand the context in which to interpret the news they see in headlines and in short pieces. How does Axios decide how much information is enough?
Yeah. I get asked this question every single time I talk about it, and I'm like, this is not the problem the world has in stuff being too brief. The problem isn't being it too long, and so I don't really worry about it that much. I also realize that, like, hey Siri, like, what's cloture, right? Like, hey Siri, you know, who's president? It's like this information is findable and knowable. Doesn't mean like I completely shirk our responsibility to give appropriate context or sort of like put enough information in here. But the problem with information on the internet is not that it's too short, it's that it's too long.
Hello. With your journalistic background and what you're talking about with smart brevity, would you say that speed is more important than quality, or is still quality important in a ever-tweeting, instant gratification, information overload?
Can they both be equally important? Or do
you have to pick one?
No, quality's got to be right. Like this is a trick question Matt Winkler, the editor-in-chief of Bloomberg, would ask every new hire. Is sort of like, what's the most important thing in journalism? And everyone would be conditioned to say, oh, you got to be first. He's like, no, you got to be right. So yes, quality has to win. Like I want to be fast. Like I don't want to be the second person to tell you something. And just from a business standpoint, like the first person on the internet gets all the clicks. So that's very useful. But never, and I tell this in the newsroom, like if I ever come to I tell my reporters, if I ever come to you and because you're slow on something and I ask why, and you say I was trying to get it right, I'll be like, oh, that's cool. Like carry on. And so there's a balance on that, but of course it tips to quality, getting it correct.
Hi. So traditionally in government, our favorite solution for brevity is acronyms. We love them. Alphabet soup. So how does you and Axios approach acronyms? Where do you decide, okay, no one's going to know what this acronym is? Where do you spell it out? Like we work at ATF, and if you spelled our full name out, it would take up a third of your little phone screen.
Everybody knows what ATF is, right?
I don't know. Do they? How do you know?
Siri,
is there data?
ATF? I don't know. It's not unknowable. We have conversations about this a lot, and that's part of sort of like knowing your reader. It's like sort of like, okay, who am I writing for? And then for the most part, they're acronyms everyone knows, and then I probably go one more level deeper. To sort of like even ones that they don't really know. A lot of time, like the argument we had about this was about CFIUS, right? I know what CFIUS is. How people kind of know what CFIUS is, but in the content of the article, who cares if you don't know what it is? Like, go look it up. Right? And CFIUS, that's a long thing to sort of spell out. So like people who want to know that will go figure it out. In the context of that article, I could probably figure out that CFIUS is some kind of government organization doesn't want us selling these things to foreign governments. And so I guess the answer is to lean in the side of shortening that, right? Like if you've spelled out an acronym that a reader knows, that smart reader has been like, thanks for nothing, while the not smart reader can now be aspirational about, oh, how do I become smart to know what that means? Talk to your phone, it'll tell you. Like I think back to like the journalism lessons of in an era of information scarcity, where sort of like we had to write for a 5th grade level. Like I remember, I don't want to dump on Bloomberg, but like one of the lines at Bloomberg was, we have to write on the Bloomberg terminal for the bond trader in Singapore and the housewife in Iowa. And I'm like, no, we should probably just write for the bond trader because he's giving us $20,000 a year, and the housewife in Iowa can figure it out on the other side. And so I think we need to be sort of far more, we should think about kind of like, what is the valuable reader we have? Like when we write, we think about like sort of like how our audience radiates, where like write for the CEO of the company and everyone in the company is going to want to read it, right? Like reach that audience, and then this aspirational readership will be like, okay, well, what's he reading? Why is he thinking about this? Like, how do I be as smart as that? Don't make it intentionally difficult to understand. But like, think about if I was talking to a smart colleague, like how would I say that? Like he would say ATF.
But just, can I just real quick follow-up?
Yeah.
I mean, one of the challenges we have, though, is that we can't select our readership. And our readership often has lower levels of literacy. And we have to think about that. And so much of our work is about giving the public access.
But then what is the piece of information that's important? Is this so, in the sentence I'm writing, is it important that the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, is it Commission? Bureau? All right. Well, it doesn't matter, I know what it is. Does it matter that the ATF is this, or does it matter that this is being said? Right? And I imagine if I scroll to the bottom of the web page, it'll have 50 lines of boilerplate about, OMB rules or something, and it'll spell out the entire kind of thing. But like, think about like, what is it that I'm trying to convey? Like, the important information is not that the name of the agency is this. Right. The important thing is that your house is on fire, right? Or a hurricane's coming, right? Absolutely. Like, don't spell out NOAA in a hurricane alert, because by the time I'm done reading the name, like, oh, I'm dead. Maybe a tornado warning. You'll have time in a hurricane.
I think we have time for one more question of Nick.
I was just curious if you guys use video or find video to be important. A while ago, it seemed like video was king, and I don't think that we had a lot of success with it. And I know as a news consumer, I don't really watch videos, or if I do, I turn on the captions and have something else going on in the background. Yeah. So I didn't know how you guys use or didn't use video.
The video is king thing was a lie. That was Facebook, and they were cheating, and they've been sued over that. There are like I'm a print person, so like I gravitate to print. And then when we have discussions about video, the discussions are sort of like, okay, be very deliberate about it, right? Employ people who know video, realizing that video is very hard and very expensive to do, and do it for things that deserve it, right? Don't just say like, okay, I have this print newsletter, I got to turn it into a video now. Like, no, it's perfectly fine as a print newsletter. Like, pick those moments. Like, there's moments when video is incredibly compelling. Pick those moments. Don't do video just for the sake of video. What a lot of news organizations did after that Facebook thing was like, we'll do video just because we're supposed to do video, but like no one's sitting here screaming for it. Nobody wants to watch this on their phone. So they don't do it. So we were very deliberate. Like, we partner with HBO. HBO is really good at video. Make a show, like, specifically. Don't just take what we do normally and convert it into that. I think the key is to be very deliberate. I say one last thing about video is you can't skim video, right? Like, you can't look around the corners at video and see where it's going, right? Like, print is so efficient and useful. Like, I can move my thumb, I can go faster, I can slow down, I can go back, I can click through to something. Video for just straight information delivery is incredibly inefficient. And no one, even Snapchat and Instagram, sort of the way they use those sort of pages, you can't sort of skim and navigate in the way you navigate text. So I'm not a huge fan of it. But find out where it works, and then it's incredibly powerful. Thank you so much. I love talking about this. My email address is nick@axios.com. I'm an inbox zero insane person. And so I'm happy to sort of answer follow-up questions or sort of connect you with folks at our organization who sort of like more training or sort of show you kinds of stuff. Or like, we have people who come talk to organizations all the time, me or other folks in my newsroom. And we love preaching this gospel. So shoot me an email. Thank you so much.
I'm a lot shorter than Nick. Thank you, Nick, for that great presentation. I hope everybody here and online enjoyed that. Thank you to our online viewers for participating. Before we end the live stream and move on to the workshop portion of our event, just want to remind everybody of our next event with the Partnership for Public Service. It'll be on February 25th, and more details will be coming about that in the next few weeks. I forgot to reintroduce myself. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Christine Stevenson. I'm the current chair for the Federal Communicators Network. So, and with that, the live stream is going to end, and please welcome